Well, good morning, everyone. When I gave my first speech at Toastmasters back in January, my remarks were entitled Buy the Book, which was in reference to the Competent Communication Manual that I used as my guide. Today, I will be speaking about a different book, but with no notes this time. So we'll see, John, if I learned my lesson from that first speech. As some of you may know, books are a huge part of my life. I actually consider books to be among my very best friends, and I carry them around with me everywhere I go. And recently I decided to take some of that enthusiasm and put it to good use by joining the Johnson County Library Foundation, where I could work on literacy programs and enhancing the collection. I really think that our local libraries are among our best community assets. But the book I'm going to talk to you about today is one of my favorites, and it's by Mr. Robert Gant, and it's entitled Sky Gods, about the creation, the expansion, and ultimately the downfall of Pan American World Airways. Now, what is a sky god? Well, that is a phrase that was actually coined by the chief pilots to refer to themselves, primarily to separate them from the other lowly menial employees such as a co-pilot or a flight engineer. Sky gods were in charge. They flew the planes and nothing else. They certainly didn't carry their own bags, they didn't make their own hotel reservations, and they certainly did not assist passengers with gate change information. They were the pioneers of the airline industry. In fact, there were stories that went around the network that the sky gods created runways out of pure jungle in the South Pacific and in Central Africa with their bare hands and a machete. And while some of those stories are grounded in myth, there is some reality to that. The risk-taking, the arrogance, and the hubris were all true. In fact, some of the characteristics that defined a sky god that created a global airline network also contributed to its downfall. Pan Am was one of the first airlines to fly to Tahiti, and we're very glad that they do so. But in the early 1960s, when flying a Boeing 707 with 140 passengers on board at night with very limited lighting and even less air traffic control, the sky gods would land 9 times out of 10. But today, the reefs outside of that French Polynesian island are littered with the hulks of Boeing 707 jetliners that just didn't make it. That was the price you paid to be a sky god. They were first in many things. They were first in the jungle, first in the desert, first in the South Pacific, and first to fly the 747. But what was the price that was paid? Pan Am remained until 1991, when a series of factors contributed to their demise. Certainly economic forces out of their control, such as deregulation of the airline industry, incredibly high oil prices in the 1970s and 80s, and certainly the factor of international terrorism, which unfortunately manifested itself in December 1988 with the destruction of Pan Am 103. But you may be asking yourself, why this topic? Why this book? Well, it all goes back to when I was a kid. I didn't play G.I. Joe like everybody else. I played pilot. I played airport. And my props were my parents' luggage that were adorned with that beautiful blue and white globe logo that symbolized Pan Am's global dominance. In later years, I even tried to take this hobby, this interest, and turn it into a business proposition. When the third generation of Pan Am owners were flying domestically in the year 2000, I drew up a proposal for my college business class to convince them that they needed to fly to Kansas City, but not to KCI. We had beautiful New Century Air Center in Gardner, Kansas, right down the road, and it would be a perfect location for them to fly to secondary markets. I had the COO of Pan Am, number 3, on the phone just long enough for him to tell me to go away. But I was proud enough that I pursued that opportunity anyway. What I love about Mr. Gant's chronicle of the history of Pan Am is he covers all of those subjects and all of those generations. The oral histories provided by the sky gods themselves is second to none. It is a great cross-section of not only aviation history, but American history as well. One final note about the ultimate sky god, a man by the name of Juan Trippe. Mr. Trippe, in 1923, bought a single biplane and secured a contract with the U.S. Postal Service to fly the mail between Havana, Cuba, and Miami, Florida. It was that one airplane that one contract that created a global airline network. It was the risk-taking, the arrogance, and the hubris of Mr. Tripp that manifested itself in the sky gods that worked for him for nearly 75 years. Juan Tripp was chairman of Pan Am for 50 years until he passed away in 1981. If you're ever walking down the street in New York City anytime soon, particularly Park Avenue, I'm sure you'll notice a massive, hulking office building 80 stories tall that says Metropolitan Life at the top of it. Today, it's occupied by insurance companies, banks, investment houses, but in 1963, that sign said Pan American at the top. It was the world's largest office building at the time, and it was Juan Tripp's monument to his life's work. It was a monument to the sky gods, and I always like looking at it as it is one of the last relics of a golden age of flying, a once great American company. So if you find yourself at a Johnson County library anytime soon, I highly recommend you wander over to the aviation section and pick out Sky Gods by Robert Gant. It is a great adventure, a